and welcome to another episode of the MMF podcast. I'm your host, Nick.
No, I'm Nick. What are you? You're stealing my character, man.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the MMF podcast. I am your host, Paul. This is my co-host, Nick. And
I'm
welcome
also
to the very first episode of the October Spooky Series, where we talk about all things scary. Episode 1. How you feeling today, Nick?
I'm great. I'm probably most excited for this series than anything else we've talked about other than Scooby-Doo, but that also correlates to spooky season, sort of.
What's your Scooby-Doo? We're coming after you. Very scary.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the movies we're talking about today probably influenced the Scooby-Doo era in general, the classic Universal monsters.
For sure. So, if you don't know yet, Nick and I have decided to do sort of a Halloween special for the month of October. Every week we're going to do a podcast that's horror related, and we're going to try and have a video almost every day on our social medias. So this week we're talking about the beginning of horror, how it really first started. You know, the Universal monster movies. We might dive into a little silent film conversation. And we're going to go through the stages of horror all the way to like the modern era. Nick, what do you want to dive into next week?
Oh, I think we're going to talk about slasher movies of the 70s to 80s, right?
I knew that was one of the weeks, but I didn't know that the jump was that big. So we're going to go from like 30s, 40s to like 70s, 80s.
I think this era starts to like overlap with the next era in general, because then, like, for one instance, Creature of the Black Lagoon is in the 50s, and then in the 60s, Psycho comes out, and Psycho isn't really like a typical slasher movie, but like I would say it's sort of like, you know, the precursor to all that. So it's
There
a lot
is some
closer than people
slashing.
think. For
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So that's the plan. We're going to go, through the eras, and we'll finish up in the modern era. But for this week, let's talk about some classic Universal monster movies. Do you think we should start with the movie that people probably know the most, Frankenstein?
I guess we can. Yeah, I love Frankenstein. How do you feel about it?
It's a great movie. I mean, I don't really like rewatching the first one as much. I think the second one's more my style. Probably, I'd even think it's a better movie, to be honest, than the first one. I think there's more personality to the monster. And especially the scene where he's with the blind man, and he starts smoking the pipe and drinking with him. Oh, good. Like, that's the Frankenstein that I remember when I think Frankenstein. That
Yeah,
guy
I
knows
actually
how
had
to
the chance.
fucking party.
I had the chance to see both Frankenstein and Bride as like a double feature at the New Beverly last year, and it was a crazy experience because for the first one, at least, it was as if people had never even heard the story of Frankenstein, because there's like a scene where Frankenstein hangs somebody and people gasped in the audience. Like, this is like an almost 100-year-old movie, and people are like still being shocked by it. And then Bride of Frankenstein right after that was a lot more campy, a lot more fun, like huge eruptions of laughter for that exact scene you're talking about, him with the old man when he's like, "This is a pipe, you can smoke it, good."
Good. He got to actually do some acting too. I mean, obviously playing a stoic monster does take a lot of acting ability, but he got to show more personality with the character in the second movie for sure.
No, definitely. Do you remember that scene in Ed Wood where Bela Lugosi's like, "Dracula, that's a role that requires acting. Frankenstein, silent monster, bleh."
Yes, Frankenstein, what does he do? He goes like this. He goes, I could do that in my fucking sleep. Something like that. You know, it's funny. Bela Lugosi actually did play Frankenstein in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So all that shit talking that he did, it kind of backfired. He ended up playing Frankenstein himself.
No, that's another interesting thing that we'll talk about, I suppose, is all these movies have like the same actors just over and over again, and they all play like each other's characters. There's never really one that like stays with one their whole career. They like jump around the different characters, which is kind of interesting.
Boris Karloff is the iconic Frankenstein, but the actor that played him the second most was Glenn Strange. Lon Chaney Jr. also played Boris Karloff. I mean, fuck me. Lon Chaney Jr. also played Frankenstein. That shows you how tied to the role Boris Karloff is. I referred to the monster as Boris Karloff. But Lon Chaney Jr. played him in Ghost of Frankenstein. And he had a cool look to him, but I think it's still, my favorite look is still the Boris Karloff version. Bela Lugosi's look just isn't it to me.
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. Like all the like tropes come from those original Frankenstein movies. Everything else after is sort of like forgotten about, not really talked about. But Frankenstein and Bride are the ones that have stayed in people's memories.
Do you like the look of the Glenn Strange monster though?
I gotta look it up really quick. I don't know it off the top of my head. Let
I
me
think
see.
it looks cool.
This doesn't look that different, I feel like. I mean, he looks more like what would eventually become the Munsters look.
Yeah, you're right. He does look the most like Herman. If you had to like 1-to-1 which Frankenstein actor looks the most like Herman, it would definitely be the Glenn Strange version.
Another thing I think that's interesting about the Frankenstein look is that, you know, the appearance of the movies has sort of overtaken the book in a way because he's nothing like how he's described in the book. Like, I feel like there's been adaptations more recently that have tried to do that, and nobody really likes those. They like the green skin, bolts in the neck look because that's just like cinema history at this point.
Yeah, it's what people know. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
change it up after 100 years.
No, for sure. I mean,
Do you
even
like the monsters?
I haven't. I think I've only seen whatever you've shown me. I watched the Rob Zombie movie, and I was very.
That movie fucking sucks, dude. I was so hyped for that. It sounds on paper, it sounded like a match made in heaven. Rob Zombie directing a monsters movie, but it strikes out on every front. It's not funny. It doesn't feel like the monsters. It's like a weird like TikTok that got out of hand. Like, let's dress up like the monsters and fuck around, but then they made it into a whole movie, and it just didn't feel right at all.
You know, another thing I want to talk about that you sort of mentioned earlier is you said Bride of Frankenstein had more like freedom to it. And I think that's sort of an interesting element with the first one in terms of censorship. Because another thing that was interesting about my screening is they had an original print where the line, "Now I'm a god," was removed. Because there was a lot of like things they were worried about with the movie. Like it was too graphic or too dark for people of the time. And you know, like they forced in that weird ending where Frankenstein dies and the scientist is like hailed as like a hero, and everyone's like, "Oh, everything's okay. We're all happy." Do you remember how awkward that ending was?
In my mind, the movie ends when the tower goes down on fire. That would have been a cooler ending.
No, definitely. And then by the second movie, you know, they let James Whale, the director, kind of have more freedom with what he's portraying and like more sympathy for the monster and like less for the scientist in general.
And you know what's so cool in the second movie? That opening scene where he like crawls out of the water in like the tower, like the rubble. He looks like really gross and creepy. Like that must have been scarring for people at that time. Like they probably never saw anything look like that on the screen. That was something, dude. But the whole God thing, I remember hearing James Rolfe talk about that. He did like a review of like all the Frankenstein movies. I always like watching his reviews like every October. And he went into detail about the censorship, and I was like, wow, like everyone was really soft back then.
Yeah, that's something you sort of see in all of these movies because I think in Dracula too, not to jump too much, but I think you don't actually even see him bite anybody. He just sort of gets close to people and then it like fades away, I think.
If you look at the history, you know, he really only played Dracula once. Like he's the iconic image for Dracula. Like he played him in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, like many years later. And he also appeared as the character on TV a couple times, but he only played in one Dracula movie. They made a sequel called I think it was The Daughter of Dracula, but they just used a wax figure of Bela Lugosi in the coffin in the beginning. They didn't actually even get him to do that one shot.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it was just one shot. I thought you were gonna say they had a wax figure the whole movie, and they were just like
No.
moving it around.
In the beginning, they show him dead in the coffin, and they didn't even get the real Bela Lugosi to sit in a coffin for a day.
Fuck that shit, and I'm not going to lay down for some movie. Fuck that.
I will not do any more movies until I meet my hero, Ed Wood.
His hero.
Pull the string! Pull the string! People with their personalities.
No, but like for as censored as these movies are, like for them to come out like so early in like film history, they're still pretty like dark for like what they are and how much censorship like was in there, and it just shows like a love of like horror in general, like going like centuries back, especially since these are all like based on books too. Like I mean, this isn't even the first adaptation of Dracula. Nosferatu came out 10 years before.
Yeah, that movie is really creepy. It's almost creepier because it's silent. It's like, what the fuck were they doing? Like, what was the set of this movie like?
No, yeah, especially because they make it like a period piece and it has just this weird elements of like this feels like footage that shouldn't even exist. Like, how am I watching these people? It feels so authentic.
Yeah, very disturbing. And wasn't the actor that played Nosferatu like actually really creepy in real life too?
I don't think so. I think that's like urban legend. There was like a movie made. I don't know which movie it was, but they like pretended like he was actually a vampire behind the scenes. And I think that's like added to like the urban legend on Max Shrek in general.
Oh, okay, so he wasn't weird in real life.
I don't think so.
He might have been a little weird. There are some really disturbing images from movies back then. I remember seeing like a list on YouTube of like top 10 most disturbing things in like old horror movies. And you weren't allowed to say the word God in some of them, but I literally saw like a detailed like surgery on an eye in one movie from like the 30s, like
Hmm.
up close, like stabbing somebody in the eye. Then there was like this other movie where this guy was in a coffin, like being buried alive, and they showed it like from his perspective, like inside the coffin. The censorship was in all the wrong places. Like you could do that
No,
shit,
yeah.
but you can't say God.
That's something with Texas Chainsaw Massacre too, is like America is usually very fine with like images of death and violence, but then like stuff that's like anti-religious or like, you know, foul language or nudity or whatever, they're very like strict on, whereas like Europe is the exact opposite. Like they're very hard on violence and then very okay with everything else.
Yeah, like nudity. If you
Yeah,
watch
like
an
Texas
Italian
Chainsaw.
horror movie, an Italian horror movie,
Go on.
bang, 5 minutes in, there's like a full vagina on screen. It's a different culture, different levels of censorship for sure.
What would you say is your favorite of the monster movies?
All right, so I'm gonna get a little bit away from the ones we've been talking about, but my favorite is definitely the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Okay.
It's so much fun. It's like simple. The whole like you know how much I love Jaws. It's like my favorite movie ever. It almost feels like the original Jaws in a way to me.
Hmm.
And the battle with the monster is just so cool. And the logistics of filming it, like I was like really a dude in that suit, and there's all these underwater shots and stuff. It's just so cool, and I love the suit. I think it's like the coolest design of any of the Universal monsters. Especially like the close-up shots where he's like breathing like a fish, like they have like the water coming out of him. Like it's definitely not the best story, but for like my interests and my film interests and the things that like inspired me, like it hits really close to home. So I've always enjoyed that one the most.
No, they get really cool like underwater shots in that movie too. Like it's like really like cool to like look at, and like that's like I think another appeal of these movies is they're just like really cool. They're doing stuff that like you didn't think was possible for filmmaking at the time. Like all these like sets and these like practical effects are just very like captivating and like pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
I love the lab explosion scenes in any of those old horror movies, 30s, 40s, 50s. any scene where there's like a lab that just starts exploding and all the props are on fire, and that always just it's very cool to me. That's kind of like what made me want to write that movie we've been working on.
No, for sure. And I mean, to talk about effects a little bit, like the Invisible Man, like blows my mind. I'm just like, how, like, what the fuck? This is like almost 100 years old, and like this like looks like incredible. It doesn't look fake at all. It looks genuinely great for its time and today even.
And now everything's done with a computer.
You haven't
Rip.
seen the Invisible Man, right?
No, I have not. I've seen the Invisible Man, Abbott and Costello though.
The
Legendary scene.
Invisible
Have you
Man.
seen that one? Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I haven't. But the original Invisible Man is insane, dude. You should definitely watch it because he's the most evil, like, motherfucker of all time. He's the worst of the monsters that we're gonna talk about. He's just a purely evil man. Like, you would think, like, oh, he went crazy or something, but no, he just like accidentally turned himself invisible, and then he's like, I guess I'm just gonna commit crimes now. And so he just starts like rampaging over this entire country. The police are like, we can't find him, he's invisible. He's just like going around strangling people, throwing them off cliffs, and it's like, Jesus Christ, dude, what's your problem?
Is he naked?
He's naked for a good majority of the movie. That's actually like, there's a scene there's a scene where he decides to go to his friend, and he's like, you're gonna be my partner in crime. And his friend's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, I'll take off my clothes and strangle you.
I'll take off my clothes. That's the threat.
He literally says,
There's
perhaps I'll remove my clothes. And his friend's like, no, no.
the Invisible Man in Abbott and Costello. He's a boxer, and he wants to beat up this other boxer, but he can't fight because he's invisible. So he has forget if it's Abbott or Costello. I think it's Costello. Go into the boxing match and fight the professional boxer, and he's getting his ass kicked. And then all of a sudden, the other guy just starts getting punched in the face left and right, but there's nobody there. It's hilarious. It's like he's winning the fight, but he's not even touching him. It's like the climax of the movie. It's the funniest scene.
That's awesome. That's a great bit.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Wolfman?
I like The Wolfman a lot, actually. I thought it was one of the better old horror movies for sure. It's a simple plot, but I like the effects. None of these movies are too long. They're all around like an hour, so they don't really drag that much. We watched The Wolfman together. I had a good time.
Yeah, our housemate Andy bought like randomly bought this like box set of like all the Universal horror movies, and then we like watched like all through most of them like one week in college, and that was a fun experience. The Wolfman is definitely one of my less favorite ones of the old ones, but I think Lon Chaney Jr. is really good. He also gives maybe the best performance in the Abbott and Costello movie because he's playing it so straight in that movie, which is exactly what's required of him. Like he's just
And they're
like so.
clowning all over him.
He's like, you don't understand. I'm evil. I'm gonna do terrible things, and they just like don't listen to him.
I love that too. Those are like the highlights of the movie. Remember when he's eating the fruit and he doesn't see the Wolfman's right behind him for like 5 minutes? He just keeps walking around the kitchen. That's one of the best bits in the movie. Surprisingly, the movies that I have seen a lot of is the Lon Chaney Jr. Mummy movies. They're all like a little bit less than an hour long. One day I watched like 3 of them in a row. They're all very basic, and it's kind of like what you think of when you think the Mummy, like the slow walking like zombie with the one arm, like uh, uh, uh. Nobody really like when they imitate the Mummy. People don't do like the Boris Karloff version of the Mummy. Boris Karloff actually played the Mummy once, the original one, I think. But Lon Chaney Jr. did it like 6 times, and he hated the role. He said it was his least favorite role he ever played. He had so much makeup on that rumor has it he used to have a tube going down to like his belt, and there was a flask full of vodka, and he would just sip it like all day while filming just to get wasted because he hated all the makeup and costume that he had to wear for it. And if you really think about it, they didn't need him to play it. there's so much makeup on it. They could have gotten somebody else, but I guess it was either good pay or they really wanted him to do it, so he did it. But he's way more talented as an actor. He doesn't need to just go, "Arr, arr, arr." But he did it for like 6 movies.
I feel like the names sort of like added to the promotions of the movie themselves. I think that's why they kept coming back over and over again, because you see Boris Karloff's name all over all these posters, and Lon Chaney Jr. He has the history with his dad too, so it's like a family legacy almost. Like his
The
dad was
Phantom of the
Phantom of the
Opera.
Opera.
Yeah.
Yeah, did his own makeup too.
Yeah, the nose. Apparently that he had tape on his nose to make it look like that. Like the pig thing.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
He's also in Cyclops. Have you ever seen Cyclops?
No, is that a monster movie?
It's so stupid. It's like this big guy, this like 100-foot guy in a diaper, and he has like makeup covering one eye. Like they didn't even make it like a Cyclops. Like it's just one eye's just covered, and the whole movie he just goes, "Arr, arr, 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 arr." And there's this one scene where this lady's like trying to King Kong him, like, "Don't be mad, like we're friendly, like don't hurt us, please don't hurt us." And they didn't have him like stop talking. Like for some reason, the way they edited the movie, the whole time she's giving the speech, he's still going, "Arr, arr, 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 arr." Like there's no way he would even be able to hear what she's saying. And the big climax of the movie is like when he fights a snake. Like they literally just like threw like a boa constrictor on set, and he just like wrestled around with it for like a minute. And that's like the big like action sequence in the movie.
That sounds like the greatest movie of all time. Why have I not seen that yet?
Lon Chaney Jr. plays the airplane pilot.
Oh, he's not the Cyclops?
No. I don't know who the Cyclops was.
That movie sounds awesome. Wait, I gotta see what he looks like now. Hold on.
Yeah, dude. Look it up. You won't regret it.
1957? Holy shit. This guy's awesome. He looks like the Toxic Avenger.
That's a good comparison, actually. Dude, have you ever heard of Sinbad the Sailor? It's not a horror movie, but they're so awesome. They're like legendary adventure movies. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
No, I haven't seen those.
Oh, dude. Highly recommend. I remember watching it when I was a kid. We had it on DVD. It's like this awesome adventure movie with magic and wizards and sword fighting, like Pirates of the Caribbean. And there's all these monsters on this island, and they're all like stop motion. And there was this awesome Cyclops monster that the guys have to fight, and they're all like throwing spears at it and stuff. And I never forget like the scream that it had. It was like, it was just such a cool sound effect. It was a really well done movie for the time. It even holds up now, dude.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and there's a skeleton sword fight like Spy Kids.
For as old as these movies seem, like they're actually like way more recent than you would think. Like one of my favorite stories is Mel Brooks talking about seeing the original Frankenstein in its original theater run, because he was like 7 or 8 when it came out. And then he goes on to make Young Frankenstein, which is one of the most popular like parody movies of all time. And like that's just fascinating to me that we still have like someone who could like be there at the time and talk about its influence.
I be normal, sir. It's Igor.
Frau Blucher.
Yeah, that is cool. You never really think about how old Mel Brooks is until you see a picture of him. Because he has such like ahead of his time humor. He always feels like he's like 30 or 40.
Mm-hmm.
Until you realize Big Weld was 20 years ago.
Well, why isn't there a monster movie about Big Weld?
Dude, Big Weld is a legend, bro. Dude, you saw his limo. Big Weld gets all kinds of ass.
No, you're right. He gets, what's her name? The mama at the end.
Aunt Fanny.
You're
Great
right.
movie.
I apologize to the Big Weld community.
Robots holds up, dude. Not a horror movie, but it still holds up.
So The thing with the Universal monsters is they became so associated with the brand that like Universal, even to this day, has tried remaking them and like continuing their legacy in different ways to varying degrees of success. Do you have like a favorite and least favorite remake or reboot of these characters?
Um, does like the Van Helsing movie count?
I suppose so.
I did like the Frankenstein in that movie, although he was kind of dumb. But I liked the design. The look of him, at least, was kind of cool. It was like a more like realistic version. It felt like it looked like an actual guy that was just like kind of sewn together, and he was like good at fighting too.
Well, what about one of our favorite movies, The Mummy from 1999, a remake of probably the worst Universal monster movie, and then one of our favorite like swashbuckling action epics of like the early 2000s.
The Mummy is awesome. It's not really a horror movie. It's just like a really fun adventure movie. I and a lot of moments from it like really stuck out to me in my childhood, especially like the bug scene where the bugs crawled under the skin and used the knife to get out. That really like creeped me out for years to come. I like the actor that plays the mummy too, the bald guy. I feel like I've seen him in a couple movies.
I think he's in Agent Cody Banks.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the 2000s were his time. There's all kinds of bangers.
Another thing I love about that movie is like it still embraces the fantasy elements. And I feel like recently a lot of their movies have like not really done so. Because I remember seeing the new Invisible Man and they try and make it like what most modern horror movies are, where they're like just allegories for like something else. So like this one's about an abusive relationship, and the Invisible Man is not actually invisible. He's just like got this suit with like cameras on it that like reflect the images like behind him and everything. And I'm just like bullshit. Cowards move, make him invisible.
Wait, that's that weird stalker movie with the boyfriend that chases his girlfriend around or his ex girlfriend?
I think so. It came out in 2020, like right before the
I
pandemic like
saw a
started.
trailer for that. I didn't know that was actually a remake. I thought that was a new thing.
It's the Invisible Man.
Uh,
Well, because
all right.
do you remember when Universal was trying to do their own Marvel Cinematic Universe with the monsters, and they started with Tom Cruise, the Mummy, and they had like a whole like photo shoot with who they were planning on playing all the monsters, and they initially cast Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man, but then obviously like Johnny Depp became poison to have in your campaign, so they just went a different direction with the Invisible Man project.
Ooh. I knew exactly where that was going. What about the best Dracula remake of all time? The Lost Boys?
Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna say an actual Dracula movie, but we love the Lost Boys here. I showed you that last like Christmas. You hadn't seen it before, and like
I
you've
know.
watched
And
it
now
like
I've seen
three
it like,
times since.
yeah. Thou shalt not fall. I could watch that
Love that
movie
movie.
any day, anytime.
I think even though Dracula is not my favorite of like the original monsters, the vampire myth in general is the most interesting to constantly like readapt into different ways because you just constantly see new vampire movies coming out, and there's always a different angle being utilized with them.
And they make the most fucking badass bands, dude. Typo Negative. She's got a date at midnight with Nosferatu.
Hell yeah, brother.
Also, no, the best remake of Dracula ever is Grandpa from the Munsters.
Yeah.
I'm gonna whip something up in the lab. Herman, stay away.
Have you seen the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula movie? That movie actually fucking rules. It's so cool.
Is that the one with Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
I have not. I've only seen the
You
Angry
should.
Video Game Nerd review of the video game version.
Oh, well, then you know everything you need to know.
I know that the
No, but
Dracula is very pale.
that movie's fantastic. Like it's like initially off-putting because like people talk about Keanu's bad accent or they're like Gary Oldman looks weird, but like it's like such a like old school movie. They do like a lot of in camera effects because they were trying to make it as if it was made like in the early 1900s, and it's just like a really cool filmmaking movie, and it's like really like effective as just like a work of art. Like I highly recommend it if you have time. Frankenstein is probably the one, for as iconic as he is. I feel like every actual secondary adaptation since then has not taken off at all. Nobody cares. They want Boris. Like there was like
Oh,
a
okay.
2014 movie called like Victor Frankenstein. Does anyone even know
Nobody gives
what
a shit.
Frankenstein looks like in that movie?
What
There
about
was like a
I
90s
Frankenstein?
fucking I don't know.
That
That's
movie
my point. Is
sucked
like,
ass.
oh really?
Yeah, dude, type in I Frankenstein. Just take one look at the poster and you'll just be like, this is fucking bullshit. 5% on Rotten Tomatoes. Fucking jokes, dude. They got Harvey
What the
Dent to
hell?
play Frankenstein.
The hell is going on here?
He doesn't even have a name anymore. It's just Harvey Dent.
Aaron Eckhart. Oh,
He's Harvey Dent, and then he became Frankenstein, and then his career went down the toilet.
Davy Jones is in this. His newest low.
He doesn't have a name either. Davy Jones and Harvey Dent made a horror movie together, and it sucked. Want to talk about the 50s?
Sure, those so the monster movies sort of evolved from like the central like humanoid figures to like big massive terrors terrorizing whole cities.
The Thing?
Oh, you're right. I forgot about the Thing from Another World.
That movie inspired so much. Big inspiration on Halloween, which we'll definitely talk about the slasher week.
Yeah, that's one of John Carpenter's favorite movies, and I mean, it's that one's weird in the sense of like it's not even as faithful to its original source as like its remake becomes. This movie tried to be like its own Frankenstein, and it's way different than the original story.
Yeah, for sure. I like the remake even more than the original.
Oh, who doesn't?
Yeah, that's true. What about The Fly?
We love The Fly. Mad scientist turns himself into a fly.
We like the remake even more on that one too. I love the remake. We have to talk about it when we get to the 80s.
Why don't we talk about it now? We're talking about like monster movies.
The descent into madness that Jeff Goldblum portrays is fantastic. That's an Oscar-worthy performance. I don't think that he was even nominated for it. Maybe because it's a horror movie. I'd have to fact check that. But that is an Oscar-worthy performance. The gradual, every scene is just like something a little bit more, a little bit more. And even when he becomes the Fly, like you could still feel like as he becomes more and more becomes the Fly, you could always feel a little piece of Seth Brundle beneath all that makeup and all those prosthetics. And even in his final form, when he's fully the Fly and he's just a giant fly walking around, there's still like one last moment where I won't spoil it if you haven't seen the movie, but there's one last moment where you could tell that Brundle is still talking from beneath all that prosthetics and all that makeup and that fly body. There's still a little piece of Brundle sentient beneath all that, and that's just amazing to me.
No, that movie's fantastic, and it's like really like sad and horrific too. Just like the concept of like having to watch someone you love just like slowly deteriorate and like lose themselves in front of you. Like it's a really like hard to watch film, and like for as like ridiculous as it is, it like feels very real too.
It's so gross, and it's like a soap opera. Like the way the music is, like the orchestra gets so dramatic and so intense. Like, don't come back here, I might hurt you. Like it, and that music's just blasting. It's just so emotional. Like it almost makes you want to cry. But then you look at him and you're like, you're too grossed out to cry because it's just so gross. But literally, that movie is like instantly a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 when I watch it. I was like, this is my favorites now.
I do love that one moment where he like accidentally throws up on himself and he's like, "Oh, that was gross." Like even he sees how gross he is.
Yeah. Flies don't think. They don't have politics. They just do.
I love the story you told me where you showed that to your ex, and like the scene where he like throws up on the guy's leg and she was like, "Ah!"
Yeah, she acknowledged that it was a good movie, but she was so grossed out by it, and that was like the peak of it because that final sequence is nonstop with the gross and the gore, and he just leans over and throws up on the guy's leg. Ah! Like all out scream, just maximum gross.
I think that's how I got you to watch it. I just was like, dude, have you seen this movie? It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, you did say that. And you know what's funny? That was always a movie that I wanted to watch. There was several times I remember bringing it up with like groups of friends like, I hear this Fly remake is really good. And like just a bunch of no's happened and I never got around to watching it. I should have just watched it by myself. So, I'm glad that you finally told me to watch it.
Yeah, a lot of people just write off movies like this because of like the title, like, oh, the fly guy turns himself into a fly, like why should I care? Or like the blob, like what's scary about the blob? And it's like you won't know until you watch it.
Yeah. The worst example of that is The Princess Bride. Can't tell you how many guys are like, I'm not watching that like lame ass chick flick. I'm like, you're fucking dumb. You're fucking dumb, dude. You're fucking dumb.
They're literally the kid on the bed being like, is there kissing in this?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. But can we talk about the bug movies again? Have you ever seen the Tarantula?
No, I've just seen the little clips of like in Lilo and Stitch when he's watching it on TV and then he starts emulating it because he thinks they're cool.
That movie, I won't say it's like a great movie, but it is a quintessential example of the time period of like the giant bug movies and like the fad. I think there's a better movie that I'll talk about in a second, but the Tarantula is a great example of that. Like it's a very simple premise. It's an easy to hate villain. There's some great scares in it, some cool effects, and then the ending leaves you with no questions. It's just like, you want me to spoil it for you?
Yeah, go talk about it.
The town tries everything. They try blowing it up. They try shooting it. They try literally setting it on fire, everything they could think of. And then at the end, the simplest climax they could possibly think of. The Air Force just comes in and they just shoot the fuck out of it with like 100 missiles and it just blows up and it starts burning. And the lead like fighter in the group of fighter jets is Clint Eastwood. So how do we kill this giant tarantula? We call in fucking Clint Eastwood to fuck the shit out of it with missiles.
That's crazy. They must have been so young.
Yeah, that was one of his first roles, I think. But I got so hyped watching it because I was like, how are they going to kill this thing? And then it was so simple, just blow it up. And I was very satisfied with the ending. It literally ends right there, too. It's just on fire, and then it goes to the end.
I want to bring up really quick. So, like, when we were writing, we wrote these two monster movie scripts. And during that period, we were watching monster movies pretty frequently, like from the 50s, like 40s, 60s. And you sent me a clip from this one movie of a like giant space crab. And the clip has like etched itself into our brains, this particular scene where he's being attacked and he says, "Ow, you've wounded me. No matter, I will grow a new claw. But can you grow a new life?"
I love that scene. I already posted that on my Instagram like 3 days in a row. It's so funny. Oh, you have wounded me. Now I must grow a new claw. But can you regrow your life?
What's
I
that
didn't
movie
watch.
called?
I forget. It might just be like the mutant crabs or something like that. But if you just type in like 50s crab movie, it comes right up. Attack of the Crab Monsters. Now I must grow a new claw. But can you regrow your life?
Yeah, it's not enough for them to be giant crabs taking like terrorizing a town. They also can talk in very eloquent British accents to taunt the people they're killing.
The best of all the giant monster movies, though, of that era, besides like Godzilla, is by far Them. Them is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple scenes that are dragged, they're like boring dialogue scenes, but every time the action happens, it delivers, dude. And there's so many elements that inspired like other movies later on from them, And the biggest inspiration that I personally felt watching it was Aliens. Like all these scenes where they're going through the tunnels and the ants keep popping out and, killing people. And then there's the scene where there's like these little kids trapped in the nest, just like in Aliens when they have to save Newt. And like all the soldiers going in with machine guns and stuff. Them delivers. Every time the climax is fantastic when they go into the nest and the U.S. Army is just shooting these giant animatronic ants and the noises they make, like, like it is a great, great, great climax to one of those movies. It more than delivers. And they don't do things like that anymore. If they have to make a giant ant now in Hollywood, it's 100% CGI. Back then, they just made giant puppets and they literally blew them up. Like there was no way they were just shooting it with like guns and grenades and just blowing up the thing while it was moving back and forth.
No, that's one you've been recommending to me for like over a year now, and I still gotta watch it. I'll probably watch it soon as like part of the spooky season horror movie watches I'm doing.
Yeah. I think my favorite part, the ending has to be my favorite, but there's this one scene in the beginning where they find this like smaller nest, like when they're first finding out about it. And just like, that scene in Jaws when Brody is like, come down here and chum some of this shit. And he's like throwing the chum, and then all of a sudden the shark pops out of the water, and you get like the first really good look at it. There's this scene where they're in the nest in the beginning, and they're just walking through, and there's like this kind of like broken up wall a little bit. And then a giant ant head just bursts through the wall, and it's just like, ah! And screaming. And they light it up with a flamethrower. And there's no bullshit. The actor is really shooting it with a flamethrower. Maybe it was a stuntman. And the puppet just starts shaking on fire in front of all the actors. And it's like this 10-foot puppet. And then the ant goes down and dies. But that scene was the moment where I was like, okay, this movie's okay. It's cool, whatever. And then I was like, holy shit, this movie is fucking awesome.
No, for sure. It sounds awesome.
Yeah. But that's my praises of them. And that's by far my favorite movie from the 50s.
Is there anything we haven't talked about?
No, we did a little silent. We did a little 30s. We did a little 40s. We did a little 50s. We hit all the genres, I think. We hit the creepy stuff. We hit the goofy stuff. There's definitely more goofy stuff we could talk about. There's a bunch of bad movies from that era. We could do that another time. I think this was a great start to our October month of fun. Do we have an official name for it yet? Or just the spooky month for MMF?
No, October month of fun sounds incredible.
The MMF October month of fun, everyone. You heard it here from the mouth of Nick Bernard.
Oh my goodness.
Stay tuned for next week, and we will have another episode where we dive into our favorite 70s and 80s slasher movies. Stay tuned, everyone, and if you're not subscribed, please do so. And if you made it to the end of this podcast, I greatly appreciate you for sticking around. Thank you.